to remember August the 14th, 2003, when a massive blackout hit East and Central Canada and the U.S. It happened on a Thursday afternoon at the end of the workday. In cities like Toronto that depend on public transit, the result was chaos. Almost 1 million people had to find another way home from work. And until the buses, trains, and streetcars started running again, many stayed home at a heavy cost for the economy in Ontario's heartland. It was a sharp reminder of how important public transit is to the Greater Toronto Area, Canada's largest and fastest growing city region, covering 7,170 square kilometers and home to more than 5 million people. Every day, the tide of city life moves in and out by local transit. And approximately 90% of all those local transit trips in the GTA, almost 1.4 million rides a day, are made on just one system, the TTC. If you include the regional commuter system GO Transit, the TTC still carries over 80%. That's almost 1.4 million riders every day, close to 8 million a week. More than 400 million trips per year, 1 billion riders every 30 months. The TTC is a vast, quick-moving river of people. Students, seniors, disabled citizens, workers on the way to and from their jobs. Each year, fully 81% of Toronto residents use the TTC. About a quarter of these riders don't have a car. And for them, the TTC is a vital, essential link to the places they need to go. The people bring life to the city, and the TTC keeps them moving, taking workers to the jobs that underpin the economy, making it possible for Toronto to generate more than $15 billion each year in taxes for the province alone, and $20 billion in taxes for Canada. Toronto is the economic engine of Canada, and the TTC is the wheels that keep it moving. But now, this entire system is threatened. The TTC was once a model for other cities. Today, the province of Ontario no longer pays its traditional 75% share of capital costs. There isn't nearly enough funding for the TTC to replace the old subway cars, streetcars, and buses in its vehicle fleet. After making do for years, many of these vehicles are past fixing. They are at or near the end of their lives, and without more sustained capital funding, they can't all be replaced.
In fact, after years with little or no provincial funding for replacements and repairs, the TTC is at a very critical time. Hello, my name is Kim Taylor, and I'm here to show you firsthand exactly what kind of problems we're facing with Canada's largest transit system. Probably the most urgent one is represented by the bus I'm traveling on right now. At 24 years old, this bus is one of the oldest in the TTC's bus fleet, but the rest aren't far behind. The average age of a TTC bus today is 14 years, and most don't last beyond the age of 18, even with major repairs. Would your car last 24 years and go 1 million kilometers? That's how far this bus has traveled. Even with our severe weather conditions, the TTC keeps its buses almost twice as long as the average U.S. city. That's because our employees do exceptional repair work. But our maintenance people aren't miracle workers, and eventually these vehicles wear out. And with the current level of capital funding, when they do wear out, they will not all be replaced, not one for one. Here's the result.
Because I have a meeting downtown, I make sure that I give myself about half an hour and I'm just going downtown. So that's, 30 minutes for a 10, 15-minute bus ride.
I know there's a lot of people just get fed up and they just take taxis.
I don't take a bus out in the suburbs anymore. I just refuse to do it because it's not worth it. Waiting around.
Since 1990, the TTC bus fleet has been reduced by almost 1/4. And where it once had a vehicle fleet of 2,800 buses, streetcars, and subways, it now has some 2,400. And currently, about half of these need to be replaced or overhauled in the next 10 years. So far, there's no stable or long-term funding to make sure that job gets done. Meanwhile, Toronto keeps growing, adding more than 500,000 people over the next 30 years, while the TTC keeps shrinking. Now I'm asking, does that make sense? Another part of the funding picture is structures like tunnels that are falling into disrepair and now need major work.
We're looking at a concrete tunnel liner, and what's happened is we've had water infiltration. The water has chlorides in it, which has caused the reinforcing steel to corrode. You can see the exposed reinforcing steel here. The reinforcing steel, when it corrodes, then causes the concrete to pop out and crack. These concrete tunnel liners need to be repaired because they're at their limit of safety at this time. So we're approaching another area where you can see that the tunnel liner has dropped. It's no longer a perfect arch as the one adjacent to it, so some of the strength is gone as a result of the fact that it's deflected. There's about 60 tunnel liners that we're aware of that are in emergency need of repair, another 600 that will be repaired over the next few years, and a total of about 9,000 that still need to be inspected to determine if further repairs are required. One of the sources of our problem is the leaks, and as you can see in this area, we've got an active leak. We've got water coming through the tunnel, landing at track level. It's actually a new leak that we will be repairing very quickly to try to stop the deterioration or further deterioration of the concrete tunnel liners. In addition to the failure of the concrete tunnel liners, the leaks cause corrosion caused by just normal rust and electrolysis of both the signal rail and the negative return rail. That's both of the running rails, as you can see, the corrosion and rust. And also of all of our electrical equipment. As you'll see here, the orange color on the cable lines here indicates corrosion and ultimately failure of that electrical line. But any leak is a problem for both the structure, the electrical systems, and the running rails. Right now, they're still at the state where they can be repaired. If their condition deteriorates any further, then it would be unsafe and we would have to replace these liners, which might cause a shutdown of the subway for a few months while the replacement is ongoing.
To sum it up, since downloading by the province, the TTC has been in a starvation diet for capital funding. That is the money needed to replace and rebuild vehicles and repair infrastructure. The TTC needs approximately $400 million a year over the next 10 years just to do that. Much more is needed to expand the system. Makes you wonder, doesn't it? Just how many other big cities do you think are confronted with this kind of situation?
I'll answer that question, and the answer is not many. Toronto is on the bottom rung of transit funding in North America. Here's Chicago, a city comparable to Toronto. In 2001, its transit authority spent over $530 million on replacements, repairs, and other capital expenses. Almost two-thirds of that came from the U.S. federal government. The Philadelphia, Pennsylvania area is home to 8 million people. Its transportation authority received over $480 million for capital funding in 2001. More than half was contributed by the U.S. federal government. Check around North America and Europe. In no comparable city will you find a transit system with less subsidy for service than Toronto. Nor will you find a city that must pay so much, almost two-thirds, of the cost of keeping its equipment and infrastructure in a state of good repair. The result is overcrowding and a steady decline in service on many TTC routes.
20 years ago, when U.S. transit managers wanted to learn how to make their systems better, they often went to Canada, specifically to Toronto, to see how public transportation systems should be run. You were a role model to us. We learned from you. But now, when we go, we ask, what happened? The TTC hasn't kept up with the city's growth. The TTC is shrinking and visibly aging, and ridership is down. It's a sad situation, and most likely it will have a negative impact on Toronto, on Ontario, and the Canadian economy in general.
This is Gridlock, Toronto style. And anyone who drives here will tell you it's worse today than it was a year ago. Traffic congestion has a huge cost and lost productivity, and it's another good reason for doing something about the sorry state of the TTC. Every time improvements in service are made at the TTC, ridership goes up. And when ridership increases, here is the potential impact of getting people out of their cars and into public transit. Just one bus can take 50 cars off the road. One subway would clear this highway. The savings to the economy? Enormous. And since transportation is the main source of greenhouse gases, public transit has to be an important part of any strategy to conserve the environment and meet the requirements of the Kyoto Accord. Ultimately, it all goes back to the people of Toronto. The TTC has ambitious plans to increase ridership and make the TTC not only the better way, but the preferred way for them to travel. But obviously, those plans are on hold because right now there aren't enough vehicles even to meet current demands. Toronto is the city where most immigrants to Canada come to start a new life. It's a city with a high proportion of young people, single parents, and seniors who depend on public transit to get around. And it's a powerhouse of the Canadian economy.
There should be a bright future ahead for Toronto and its citizens, but it could be hard to get there if we don't take action now to renew a public transit system whose best days should be ahead of it.